1 minute was all it took. A quiet royal order whispered through palace corridors, and Meghan Markle's children were erased from the royal line of succession. An act so ruthless, it has shaken the monarchy to its very core. The announcement did not come with fanfare. There was no press conference, no televised address, no grand declaration from the throne. Instead, it was a quiet, almost surgical strike. Archie and Lilibet's names, once secured among the lineage of kings and queens, were suddenly gone. A simple update on the official royal records, a line erased, and history rewritten in silence. Yet in that silence came an explosion, a storm that spread from the walls of Windsor to every corner of the globe. Within hours, the media caught the change, and headlines erupted. Reporters struggled to confirm what insiders already knew: this was not a clerical error, not a technical oversight. It was deliberate, and the implications were seismic. Meghan had believed, even in the darkest moments of her exile, that her children's place in the line was untouchable. Titles could be debated, roles could be stripped away, but succession was something sacred, something guaranteed by birthright. And yet, it was gone, as if her children had never existed within the royal order. The palace, true to its nature, offered nothing but silence. No statement, no denial, no explanation. But silence in such moments speaks louder than words. And it was that silence which drove speculation into frenzy. For the press, it was confirmation of an internal decision too dangerous to speak of openly. For Meghan, it was betrayal of the highest order. And for the people, it was proof that the monarchy was once again willing to sacrifice family for the sake of its survival. Behind closed doors, whispers turned into accusations. This was not simply the will of King Charles, though his signature was undoubtedly the final mark. Sources whispered of orchestration, of an entire council of senior royals quietly aligning behind the move. It was said to be strategic, not emotional. A cold decision made to protect the crown from what they saw as instability and scandal. But others insisted the decision was personal, a vendetta cloaked in duty, a deliberate move to humiliate Meghan and erase the legacy she had fought to preserve for her children. For the staff within Windsor, the atmosphere was described as funeral-like. Courtiers, long accustomed to secrets, admitted privately that they had never seen a decision of this magnitude handled in such ruthless quiet. Some claimed to have seen Charles himself, walking the halls late into the night, his face marked not by triumph, but by the burden of what he had done. Others whispered of Anne's fierce disapproval and of William's silent, calculated stance. But the greatest shock remained unanswered. Who signed the order, and why now, at this precise moment, when the family could least afford another fracture? The question spread faster than answers could be silenced. Why were Archie and Lilibet erased while Andrew, long disgraced, remained untouched? Why was Harry, once the crown's spare, left powerless in defending his own children? And why did this decision carry the air of inevitability, as if it had been planned long ago, waiting only for the right moment to strike? But to understand why this brutal act happened, we must peel back layers of secrecy that the palace has kept hidden for years. The truth didn't come from an official announcement. It came from a leaked royal dossier, buried deep in the archives, stamped with one word: confidential. For years, the whispers had been dismissed as rumor, speculation woven by tabloids desperate for scandal. But the dossier shattered any illusions of coincidence. It was not a mistake that Meghan's children had been removed. It was the execution of a plan long in motion, carefully constructed and hidden in the shadows of royal corridors. The origins of the dossier pointed to a select group of insiders, reportedly overseen by Princess Anne herself, aided by courtiers who had served the monarchy for decades. These were not figures motivated by personal spite, but by a fierce loyalty to the institution. And yet, their loyalty produced a document that read like a warning, wrapped in betrayal. Its pages, now whispered about in hushed tones among staffers and insiders, were laced with dark warnings. One line stood out above all: succession must remain untainted by controversy. In those words, Meghan's worst fears were realized. The institution had not only questioned her place, but had placed her children under a shadow of doubt. They were not seen as heirs to a throne, but as symbols of risk, distractions that could unravel centuries of carefully maintained tradition. For Meghan, this was not only a rejection, it was erasure dressed up as protocol. What shocked observers most were were the notes that directly referenced Meghan's outsider status. She was described as culturally divergent, a veiled phrase loaded with meaning. Concerns were laid bare about her children's connection to what some within the firm deemed unpredictable influences. To see such language in an official document revealed just how deep the unease ran and how little protection Meghan's marriage to Harry had offered. The very bloodline of her children had been placed under scrutiny. Their legitimacy weighed against the fragile image of monarchy. But perhaps the most chilling revelation was the alleged role of Prince William. Though never confirmed publicly, the dossier carried references suggesting his influence in pushing the idea of preserving the purity of the crown. To hear such words connected to the man destined to be king was more than shocking. It was devastating. For Meghan, who had once stood alongside William and Catherine with the hope of unity, this revelation painted him not as a silent bystander, but as an active participant in the decision that destroyed her children's place in history. Then came the line, attributed directly to King Charles, that froze even the most hardened insiders. "This is about the survival of the monarchy." It was a sentence so raw, so unapologetic, that it revealed the monarchy's true calculation. The erasure of Archie and Lilibet was not framed as personal vengeance or petty rivalry, but as a cold, strategic act. For Charles, it seemed the crown itself outweighed any bond of blood, any duty as a grandfather. Survival of the institution had been prioritized above the survival of trust within his family. Yet, the dossier's emergence raised a darker question still. How did it come to light? Such documents were never meant to leave the inner sanctum of royal power. Its leak suggested intent, not accident. Someone from within had wanted this truth exposed. Perhaps to warn Meghan, perhaps to weaken Charles, or perhaps to stir public outrage that could shake the crown from its foundation. Whoever orchestrated it had placed a match to dry timber, igniting a firestorm that could no longer be contained. Yet this dossier was only the beginning. The real betrayal came from within Meghan's own family circle. They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family, and Meghan's devastation began with someone she trusted. For Meghan, the first crack in the foundation came not from a headline or a leaked file, but from a quiet confession. She had told Harry in private that she felt the walls closing in, that subtle signals from the palace pointed toward an unimaginable outcome. Meghan sensed a storm building long before it broke. But what she didn't know was that Harry, the one man she believed would always shield her from harm, may have already heard whispers of the plan. The rumors were impossible to ignore. Harry had known, or at least suspected, what was coming. And instead of preparing her, he had chosen silence. A silence meant to protect his father, but one that left his wife unguarded. That silence would cut her deeper than any public humiliation. Meghan had built her entire new life on Harry's promise of loyalty, of standing as a united front against an institution that sought to consume them. To feel abandoned at the very moment she needed him most was not simply a marital wound, it was a fracture of trust that threatened to unravel everything. For Meghan, this was not politics, this was survival. And when the man who once told her she was his refuge became a guardian of royal secrets, the betrayal was unbearable. Inside the Sussex circle, those closest to them described nights of restless pacing and whispered arguments that turned into fiery confrontations. Staff recalled sleepless evenings in Montecito, where the tension was so thick it seemed to echo through the walls. Meghan, once composed in public and careful with her words, was said to be raw with anger, her voice breaking under the weight of disbelief. She had been promised a partnership. Instead, she felt sacrificed, left exposed so the crown might remain unscathed. As her private anguish grew, her allies began to circle. Oprah's camp, long a lifeline for Meghan, reportedly urged her to strike back swiftly, to go public with what she knew before the palace could bury the truth. The pressure to reveal everything mounted. Meghan's closest confidantes described a woman caught between devastation and defiance, torn by the need to protect her children, yet unwilling to accept their erasure without a fight. Every tear was matched by a vow. If the palace could not be trusted, then the world would hear the truth. It was in this crucible of betrayal that something inside Meghan changed. No longer merely a duchess in exile, she became a mother consumed by fury, ignited by the sense that her children had been discarded for the sake of appearances. This was not just grief, it was resolved. And that resolve would soon transform into action. But Meghan wasn't the only one torn apart, because William and Catherine's silence raised even darker suspicions. As Meghan wept in California, William and Catherine remained stone-faced, their silence louder than any denial. It was not Charles alone who carried the weight of this decision, nor Camilla, who bore the brunt of suspicion. The spotlight inevitably shifted toward the heir, Prince William. For in matters of succession, nothing of this scale could happen without his shadow lingering behind it. His role as the future king positioned him as more than an observer. He was a gatekeeper, the one who would inherit the fragile crown and the storm that surrounded it. His refusal to speak, neither condemning nor defending, was interpreted as far more than neutrality. To many, it was tacit approval. That silence became its own weapon. Each day that passed without a word was read as confirmation, not restraint. If William disagreed, why did he not protect his brother's children? Why did he not offer Meghan the smallest shred of reassurance? The absence of his voice was not emptiness, it was strategy, and the strategy suggested a man determined to protect something far greater than brotherhood, the unchallenged future of his own children. For Catherine, whispers followed her every move. She was portrayed not as passive, but as calculated. Rumors swirled that she had quietly endorsed the removal, not out of malice toward Meghan, but out of fierce devotion to George, Charlotte, and Louis. Was she shielding their destiny, ensuring no rival claims could ever complicate their path to the throne? Her polished composure in public only deepened suspicion. To some, she was the mother fighting for her children's crown. To others, she was complicit in erasing the children of her sister-in-law. The public began to question whether this was not simply a bureaucratic act, but a coordinated tightening of power. Each glance, each silence, each restrained smile of William and Catherine was dissected by observers who saw something darker beneath. Were they consolidating their grip on the monarchy, ensuring that no branch of the family tree could grow strong enough to overshadow their own? The very idea set fire to public opinion, framing William and Catherine not as victims of circumstance, but as architects of a future designed only for their bloodline. The tension did not go unnoticed within the royal family itself. Royal photographers captured a brief, sharp exchange between William and Princess Anne at a public event. Their body language told a story of its own strained, clipped, almost confrontational. Anne, long seen as a blunt truth-teller, appeared weary of William's silence, while William's gaze carried the defiance of a man unwilling to explain himself. That fleeting moment only fueled speculation. Divisions were no longer whispered in private. They were visible in daylight. And at the center of it all stood Charles, a man torn between protecting his eldest son's authority and preserving the monarchy's reputation. He understood that every silence, every refusal to act, risked confirming suspicions that the crown had chosen winners and losers among its own children. It was a burden that threatened to collapse the fragile balance he had tried to maintain. And then, from the shadows, Princess Anne stepped forward, not to defend Meghan, but to expose an even darker truth. In a rare, hushed conversation overheard at Balmoral, Princess Anne delivered a warning that still chills the palace halls today. Anne had always been known as the unshakable force of the monarchy, the daughter who spoke plainly, who refused to bend to the theater of royal politics. But on this night, her voice carried a weight unlike anything heard before. Turning to her brother, she is said to have uttered words so sharp they cut through the grandeur of the crown itself. History will not forgive this decision. It was not simply a sister's concern, it was a prophecy. Anne understood better than most that what had been done to Meghan's children would leave scars on the monarchy deeper than any scandal of the past. Behind the scenes, whispers revealed that Anne had fought to keep Archie and Lilibet's names within the line of succession. She had reportedly argued in private meetings that bloodline was sacred, that to erase children born of the Windsor family was to rewrite history in ways that could never be undone. Those close to her described a woman clashing with tradition-bound courtiers, demanding that Charles honor the vision their mother, Queen Elizabeth, had upheld until her dying day. For Anne, the monarchy had survived crises before, but it had always survived through unity. This, she believed, was not preservation. It was destruction, disguised as duty. But perhaps her most explosive confrontation came not with Charles, but with Camilla. The two women, long at odds, allegedly faced one another in a private exchange that reverberated across the palace. Anne accused Camilla directly of fueling the pressure that led to the removal. It was a rare breach of royal discretion, a moment when truth boiled over into accusation. Staff who heard whispers of the clash claimed Anne's words were laced with fury. This is not about duty, it's about jealousy. The accusation struck at the heart of the monarchy's most delicate fracture. If true, it meant the succession had been tampered with, not out of necessity, but out of personal rivalry and resentment. Anne's defense of Meghan's children did not come from sentimentality alone. Those who knew her best insisted it was loyalty to her mother's vision that guided her. Queen Elizabeth had stood as a guardian of tradition, and Anne believed her mother would never have endorsed the removal of heirs born of her own blood. To defy that vision was to betray her memory, a line Anne refused to cross, even as others justified it as political strategy. Her warnings carried the echo of Elizabeth's legacy, a reminder that some decisions could haunt the crown forever. Within the palace, staff began to murmur that Anne had become the last true moral compass of the firm. While others maneuvered for power or sought protection for their children's futures, Anne spoke of honor, of history, of the weight of conscience. Her words, whispered in corridors and retold by those present, began to circulate like an unshakable truth, that the monarchy had not acted from necessity, but from fear, and in that fear, it had compromised its very soul. But even Anne's voice couldn't stop the storm, because Camilla's hidden agenda was finally dragged into the light. For months, whispers circled that Queen Camilla's hand guided the pen that struck Archie and Lilibet's names from the list. What began as speculation soon hardened into conviction. Behind the palace's silence, leaks began to drip from those closest to the Queen Consort, each one pointing to a chilling possibility that it was Camilla who had pressed hardest for the removal. She had argued, sources claimed, for what she called a clean royal slate. To her, the monarchy could not afford to be haunted by divisions, scandals, or the echoes of Meghan's rebellion. And so, the solution was brutal in its simplicity: erase her children from the line and secure the future for those deemed loyal. But the decision carried far more venom than protocol. Camilla's rivalry with Meghan had been no secret. From the moment the Duchess of Sussex stepped into the royal world, the tension between them had simmered. Meghan was young, charismatic, and most dangerously loved by a public that saw in her shades of Diana's warmth. For Camilla, who had spent decades fighting to reshape her own image, the comparison was intolerable. Resentment, once kept behind closed doors, had hardened into something darker. And now, with the stroke of a pen, she had the chance to destroy Meghan's legacy by striking at her children. The stakes were not only symbolic. With Meghan's children gone from succession, the balance of influence within the family shifted. Camilla's own children, though not royal by blood, suddenly stood to gain ground in matters of prestige, power, and proximity to the throne. What had once been dismissed as harmless speculation now looked like calculated maneuvering. The crown, it seemed, was not only being preserved for William's line, it was being reshaped to benefit Camilla's. To Meghan's allies, the move reeked of fear. They claimed Camilla had long dreaded the possibility that Diana's legacy might be reborn through Archie and Lilibet, that the children could one day embody the very qualities that once made the people adore Diana and question Camilla. For Meghan's supporters, this wasn't about protocol, it was about silencing Diana's shadow once and for all. And then came the most damning revelation of all. A claim that Camilla herself had told close confidants, "They will never wear the crown." The words spread like wildfire, igniting a storm of outrage across the world. For critics, it was confirmation of her ruthless intent. For the public, it was unforgivable, a reminder of the woman once accused of tearing Diana's world apart, now allegedly moving to erase Diana's grandchildren from royal history. The fury was immediate and explosive. Crowds voiced their rage, commentators condemned the monarchy, and across social media, one phrase trended with relentless force: Diana's revenge. For millions, the removal of Archie and Lilibet was not merely a bureaucratic act, but a cosmic betrayal of Diana's memory. It painted Camilla not as a queen consort, but as a usurper who had taken from Diana in life and was now determined to take from her legacy in death. But if Camilla thought she had silenced Meghan forever, she was gravely mistaken. Stripped of royal standing, Meghan rose not as a duchess, but as a mother ready for war. The moment Archie and Lilibet's names vanished from the royal succession, Meghan's despair transformed into determination. She had been humiliated before. She had endured the whispers, the judgment, and the relentless campaign to push her aside. But this was different. This was not about her reputation or her role. This was about her children, their identity, their future. their very place in history. And Meghan vowed she would not let them be erased. That vow became the fire that fueled her counterattack. Late into the night, long after the lights dimmed in her Montecito home, Meghan was said to be on the phone with American media allies. Trusted figures in television, journalism, and publishing listened as she laid out her side of the story. She spoke of betrayal, of secrets buried deep within the palace, of the ruthless hand that had torn her children from the line of succession. To her allies, she framed it as not only a personal injustice, but a generational one, a deliberate attempt to silence the legacy of diversity and progress that her children represented. And in those conversations, Meghan began laying the groundwork for something far greater than a public statement. She began planning a campaign of truth. Lawyers soon entered the fold, their phones buzzing with urgent calls. Legal experts in both Britain and the United States examined whether Meghan had grounds to sue the Crown itself. Could she challenge the decision as discriminatory? A violation not just of family loyalty, but of basic human rights? The whispers of legal action were more than rumors. They were a direct threat to drag centuries of royal tradition into the harsh light of a courtroom. For the palace, it would have been a nightmare. For Meghan, it was leverage. But Meghan understood that legal battles moved slowly, and her fight required immediacy. She began preparing for interviews, carefully curated to reveal the truth behind the monarchy's betrayal. Trusted producers were brought in. Drafts of talking points circulated, and each phrase was sharpened into a blade. Meghan's allies promised that when she spoke, it would be devastating. She would not appear as a duchess scorned, but as a mother, a protector, a woman who had been forced to stand against the very crown that had once welcomed her. Her vow was unshakable. "My children will not be erased from history." Those words, spoken in private but echoed by confidantes, captured the raw force of her defiance. To Meghan, this was no longer about reconciling with the family she had married into. It was about ensuring that Archie and Lilibet's story was preserved, not as footnotes in royal betrayal, but as symbols of resilience against an ancient institution unwilling to accept them. Caught in the middle was Harry. He loved his wife and adored his children, yet the chains of his birthright held him in conflict. To speak out meant destroying what little remained of his relationship with his father and brother. To remain silent meant standing by as his wife fought a war alone. Those who knew him described a man torn apart, pulled between the loyalty demanded by his family in Britain and the loyalty demanded by the family he built in America. His hesitation only deepened Meghan's fury, isolating her further, but hardening her resolve. And then came the whispers of a second bombshell interview, one to rival, or even surpass, the seismic shock of Oprah. This time, it would be darker, sharper, and far more devastating. Meghan would hold nothing back. She would expose not just the decision itself, but the names, the whispers, the motives behind it. She would make the world see what had been done, not as rumor, but as reality. But the battle lines drawn by Meghan were nothing compared to the public uprising that followed. When the British people realized what had been done to Meghan's children, the fury was unlike anything seen since Diana's funeral. The monarchy had long believed it could withstand storms. Scandals had come and gone, whispers had been silenced, and crises had been managed with the cold precision of an institution that had endured for centuries. But this time was different. This was not a private failing, nor a whispered rumor. This was a decision that cut to the very heart of the royal promise, that blood, once royal, remained royal forever. To see Archie and Lilibet erased from the succession ignited a wave of outrage that surged far beyond palace walls. Within hours of the revelation, crowds began to gather outside Buckingham Palace. They did not come with flags of loyalty, but with signs of defiance, demanding answers that the palace refused to give. The chants grew louder, angrier, echoing through the same gates that once welcomed cheering crowds on coronations and jubilees. This time, the cheers had turned to condemnation. What had been presented as order and duty was being exposed as cruelty and betrayal. Across the world, the fury spread like wildfire. Hashtags blazed across social media. Justice for Archie and Hands Off Lilibet. Millions joined the digital uprising, uniting voices from London to Los Angeles, from Toronto to Sydney. What began as a family scandal was no longer confined to royal watchers. It became a movement, a reckoning, a public indictment of the very crown itself. The monarchy, once untouchable in its mystique, now stood naked before a world demanding accountability. The numbers told the story no palace aide could spin. Opinion polls showed approval for the monarchy, plunging to depths unseen in modern times. For the first time, even those who had once been silent supporters began to question whether the crown had lost its moral right to lead. Among the young, the shift was seismic. Voices rose in defiance, openly calling for abolition of the monarchy itself. For them, this was not merely about Meghan's children, it was about a system exposed as archaic, exclusionary, and unwilling to evolve. The storm did not stop at Britain's shores. In America, politicians began weighing in, framing the erasure as an international embarrassment. Meghan, after all, was no longer just a royal figure. She was an American mother whose children had been cast aside. Senators, activists, and media giants called the act shameful, sparking debates on news networks that painted the monarchy as a relic struggling to survive in a world that demanded justice and equality. For Charles, for William, for the entire firm, it was a humiliation of the highest order. The media, sensing the gravity of the moment, reached for comparisons from history. The crown's greatest crisis since abdication, one headline thundered, placing the decision to remove Meghan's children alongside Edward VIII's scandal that nearly toppled the monarchy a century earlier. The implication was clear. This was not merely a stumble, it was an existential crisis. A monarchy that had survived wars, divorces, and deaths now found itself on the brink, not because of external forces, but because of a choice made from within. The world raged outside, but inside the palace, something even more explosive was taking place. Behind gilded doors, away from the cameras and chants, a final confrontation was brewing. And it was this confrontation, not the protests, not the hashtags, that would seal the monarchy's fate. But while the world raged outside, inside the palace, a final confrontation was unfolding that would seal the monarchy's fate. In the darkened halls of Windsor, King Charles gathered his family for one last attempt at unity. What followed was the breaking of the royal family itself. The meeting was called in desperation. Charles, burdened by the weight of a fractured monarchy, begged his children and his siblings to find common ground before the crown itself collapsed. But the gathering was doomed before it began. Meghan refused to attend. Instead, she sent a letter so scathing it left even hardened courtiers speechless, accusing the monarchy of betrayal so deep it could never be forgiven. The words, read aloud in the chamber, hung in the air like a curse. The tension erupted when William turned on Harry, his voice breaking with fury. "This is the life you chose." It was not merely an argument, it was an indictment, a wound reopened that had never healed. Harry stood silent, torn between guilt and rage, unable to defend himself or his wife. Anne, disgusted by the spectacle, rose to her feet and declared that history would condemn them all. With those words, she stormed out, leaving only silence in her wake. Camilla, by contrast, seemed almost triumphant. Witnesses claimed she leaned close to a confidant and whispered two chilling words, "It's done." And indeed, it was. Archie and Lilibet's names were gone forever from the line of succession, their future erased, their legacy shattered. What remained was not a united royal family, but a monarchy fractured beyond repair. And so, the story ends not with unity, but with betrayal, loss, and a monarchy standing on the edge of collapse. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.